has indeed been a very wonderful meeting, and I've enjoyed immensely all the speeches I've heard so far. And as Sam says, last December I was arrested under the Terrorism Act for a single tweet, 7 o'clock in the morning. About a dozen police arrived at my door. They were actually very courteous and polite, unlike Sarah Wilkinson, I have to ask, and I was released on bail fairly quickly. But it is quite terrifying, the use of terrorism as a weapon of the state against free speech for Palestine. And that's something really that should worry every single person. Now, I don't want to spend much time on Sharon Graham because she's a narrow-minded, racist, Zionist bigot who is short-sighted, narrow-minded, you name it. We know for a fact the Labour Against Anti-Semitism welcomed her election, as did other Zionist groups. It's quite clear where her sympathy lies. But all I say is she is in a tradition of British trade union leaders. And when I hear the excuse for banning Asa's book, they don't want to hurt the feelings of Jewish people. I think back to the history of the TUC, which is meeting, of course, this week. In the 1880s, they passed 3 successive resolutions demanding the introduction of what they were called anti-alienist legislation, which were aimed at Jewish refugees fleeing the pogroms from Tsarist Russia. So let's be clear, it's not about Jews. Jews are used as the moral alibi for the genocide taking place in Palestine today. And one of the excuses, of course, of Israel is that October the 7th was a second Holocaust. They're suffering from Holocaust trauma and all the rest of it. And I say that's absolute rubbish. As I wrote recently for the Electronic Intifada, what they're suffering is not from a Holocaust trauma, but a settler colonial trauma. The trauma that slaveholders had at the fear that their black slaves might rise up against them and do to them what they'd done to them. Just as in, for instance, Haiti, when the slaves rose up, a successful revolution, they killed all the French slave masters. And they lived in that terror. And that's Israel. Israel's fear, of course, is that what they do to the Palestinians may one day be done to them. So they're going to carry out a genocide to preempt that. And that, of course, is what is happening. But I was amused, really, when Asa, I've changed a bit of what I'm going to say, because Asa said that the Jewish Labour movement wrote to Sharon Graham to complain how anti-Semitic it was to say there was any ideological similarity or congruence between the Nazis and the Zionists.
Well, we don't know for sure it was Sharon Graham because it was it was blanked out, but quite possibly. Yeah.
In my book on page 56, I quote a letter written by the German Zionist Federation on the 21st of June 1933, and it was to Hitler. And it's, for anyone who doubts the authenticity of it, it's in Lucy Davidovitz's book, War Against the Jews. She was a right-wing Zionist historian, so I don't think anyone can doubt it. And they're not War Against the Jews, in the Holocaust readers. So, and I'll read it out because it really answers that question. They wrote, this memo was never ever replied to, but they wrote it, it was found later. Zionism has no illusions about the difficulty of the Jewish condition, which consists above all in an abnormal occupational pattern and in the fault of an intellectual and moral posture not rooted in one's own tradition. In other words, Jews were all left-wingers. An answer to the Jewish question truly satisfying to the national state, this is the Nazi state, can be brought about only with a collaboration of the Jewish movement that aims at a social, cultural and moral renewal of Jewry. On the foundation of the new state, this is the Nazi state, which has established a principle of race, fruitful activity for the fatherland is possible. our acknowledgement of Jewish nationality, because the Nazis argued that Jews were a separate nation. They weren't German, they were Jewish nationals, provides for a clear and sincere relationship to the German people and its national and racial realities, precisely because we don't wish to falsify these fundamentals, because we too are against mixed marriage and for maintaining the purity of the Jewish group. The Nuremberg laws of 1935 made it illegal for Jews and non-Jews to marry. The realization of Zionism could only be hurt by resentment of Jews abroad against the German development. Boycott propaganda, because there was a massive Jewish boycott in Nazi Germany, but the Zionists were opposed to it, is in essence un-Zionist, because Zionism wants not to do battle, but to convince and to build. I mean, that was a memo sent, as I say, to Hitler by the German Zionist Federation. So the idea that there wasn't a parallel between Zionism and its racial supremacy that we see today very clearly, and what the Nazis were saying about Jews, is absolute codswallop. It's freely available, even in books written by Zionist historians. But I want to say, going back to Sharon Graham, that she is in a long tradition of British trade union leaders. The British trade union movement never opposed empire or imperialist politics, and it came very late to the anti-apartheid struggle. So that kind of narrow-minded chauvinism is unfortunately a tradition the British trade unionists have for a very long time been part of. And I want to go on from that really to say that we've all witnessed the horrific situation in Gaza, which Jonathan in particular outlined in quite, well, appalling, horrific detail. And I think we have to reassess where we are as a solidarity movement. I mean, I resigned 2 years ago from National Palestine Solidarity Campaign because it had dropped its opposition to Zionism. And I think today we have to understand that the ideology that drives Jewish supremacism in Israel is the Zionist ideology, which says that if you're Jewish, you have the right to someone else's land. And bear in mind, of course, that Zionism wasn't a Jewish tradition. Jewish Zionism was a relative latecomer in the late 19th century. It was Christian Zionism which had preceded it by 4 centuries. And it was Christian imperialists, Lord Palmerston, Lord Shaftesbury, Disraeli later, and of course literary people like George Eliot, who tried to persuade Jewish people of the merits of Zionism, of the return to Palestine, or the Holy Land as they called it then. And the reasons why were simple, because as Joe Biden said, if Israel didn't exist, we would have to invent it. Israel performs a very useful strategic role in the Middle East. And I think we need to draw the conclusions from that, because I think the weakness for the trade union movement, every trade union virtually, including the GMB even, has policy on Palestine, supporting BDS, opposing apartheid in Israel and so on. But they also have policy supporting 2 states as a solution in the Middle East, in Palestine. And I think we have to take a very clear position on the 2-state solution, which is that today it is an apartheid, it is a neo-colonial solution, because what it does is accept the legitimacy and the rightfulness of having a Jewish state in the Middle East. And we have to cross that barrier. And when the Zionists say to us, well, there's only one Jewish state in the world, my answer is quite simple: it's one too many. Any state based on religion, which defines its ruling ethno group on the basis of religion, automatically excludes anyone who's not of that religion. It cannot help but be racist. South Africa called itself a Christian country. The most anti-Semitic countries during the Holocaust in the 30s and the 40s, Romania, Croatia, Slovakia. They were all Christian ethnocentric states who participated willingly and eagerly in the Holocaust. So Israel, as a Jewish state, is a reflection of them. And we should not accept this kind of right of Israel to exist. No state has the right to exist. Certainly not Israel. And today, Israel has adopted, and it's not just the leadership of Israel, it's not just the military, but the ordinary people, an exterminationist mentality, because Zionism has drawn the lesson from the Holocaust. Not that racism is wrong, that fascism is wrong, but it is right if we do it. That for them, the Holocaust has given them the legitimacy to practice what was practiced to Jews, because very simply, unless you believe that racism is biologically inherited, then any group of people, given the right set of circumstances, can become racist, can become oppressors, can become fascists, and Jewish people are no exception. What we hear today, and I have some quotes here. It's from the most popular podcast in Israel, which was broadcast recently. Some of you may have heard it. It's titled Two Nice Jewish Boys. So, forgive us, just a few quotes. Forgive us if we don't give a shit. If everybody there dies, it's just the way we feel. It's just the way Israelis feel, said their co-host Eitan Weinstein. If you gave me a button just to erase Gaza, every single living being in Gaza would no longer be living tomorrow. I would press it in a second. Menninger added they would also want to wipe out Palestinians in the territories, that is the West Bank, because that's the reality we live in. It's us or them. And it also wouldn't mean what we're doing in Gaza, because in Gaza maybe there's mass destruction, but there's not massive death. And so it goes on. I mean, that is a Nazi mentality. And that is the mentality that Israelis today have adopted. Finish them off is the most popular car bumper sticker. Yeah, I mean, you could not really make it up. That is the lessons that have been drawn. But of course, when it comes to the West, John Kirby, the national security spokesperson in the United States, when questioned about American support for Israel, he says he hasn't seen any evidence of war crimes. That these people simply do not see, in much the same way as the Rwandan genocide, that in Cambodia, the Holocaust, and so on. Also, people averted their eyes, and that is what's happening today. And that is what is our job, really, is to make sure that they cannot avert their eyes any longer. And when we have Starmer and Lamy sanctioning just 8% of the weapons that we're supplying, then you know exactly what the game is. And Germany is the second largest supplier of weapons to Israel. And let no one believe it's out of some form of guilt that Germany is doing what it does. That is really absolute nonsense. I mean, the fact is that Germany has taken part in 3 Holocausts. The Armenian genocide when it was allied with Turkey in the First World War, the genocide of the Herero and Nama people in Southwest Africa, now Namibia, and of course the Holocaust itself during the Second World War. So their support for Israel legitimizes what they themselves have done in the past, and I think that is what we have to understand. But we also have to understand that the elites in Germany, the ruling class in Germany, are not the same as the people in Germany. Opinion polls are very similar to what they are in this country, and that is another facet of what we are experiencing, which is the lack of democracy in the society we live in. That the elite support the genocide and want Israel to go to the end, but the vast majority of people in the West do not support their leaders. And that's something I think we have to bear in mind when they try to cancel our demonstrations or our meetings or anything else for that matter. So really, I want to wind this up by saying that what's happening in Gaza, and also now, of course, in the West Bank, because the situation in Jenin, where I have quite some involvement, which is called the Little Gaza, where they've destroyed 70% of the roads and many of the homes that people live in, etc. We have to draw some conclusions. And those conclusions are that we don't go along in the same way as we've done before. The Palestine Solidarity Movement needs to learn the lessons. And one of those lessons is if a country is an apartheid state, as Israel is today without a doubt, then it certainly doesn't have any right to exist. Thank you very much.